over time. Anyway, you'll have to read my other publications coming out later to see exactly why. So I'm saying that the few physicists that have spread through the whole community of physics that quantum reality involves paradox is incorrect, and that these are actually discovered by the Buddhists and don't involve paradox at all. They're the only consistent things that exist. And all these are describable by contradiction. Now that needs to be backed up. I need to give an example. So let's do that. Because to say that anthropology, talk about societies, or sociology or economics, or biochemistry, or inorganic chemistry, or superconductor physics, all these are ultimately described in terms of absurdity, needs to be backed up. So let me do that. Just quickly, if you want better description of for why, just read anything I've written. But let me give you one quick example. Reality, Division 2, Div 2 reality, here up, can be described in very simple terms. Everything has a surface. Even things like clouds or so forth. You're going to see a cloud. You're going to see this white wall, semi-transparent white wall. So it's going to appear to you as a surface. That's the important thing. We're concerned with experience here, not experience is the basis of science, is the basis of Buddhist atomism. So everything here has the things that I mentioned before about materiality, materialism. Everything has a location. Everything has a surface. Most things are solid, and so forth. Things move and persist through time. Let's just take one of those primary attributes. If we can show that these are absurd, then that means that we can show that anything in reality from here up is absurd. So let me just take motion. Well, I didn't choose that by accident. That's the one I happened to just quickly print off my computer before I flew out of here. We flew out of Indiana yesterday. So here we go. Let me just read what I have for you. I could do this for any example that you want, causation, time, anything, but movement is one that I just got done going over in my logic class at Indiana U Northwest with students, and they seem to like the description, so here we go. So imagine that the room you're sitting in here is pitch black, and I shoot a glowing bullet through it. What do any of you see? What will you see? You see a line from, if the gun's right here, it'll start here and it'll end, at the wall over there as it goes through the wall. Okay, now, does the line exist or not? No. The line exists in the mind, but the line is a construction of consciousness. Why? Because your senses are too crude to pick up the bullet's moment-to-moment positioning. I just said, just let me use the word positioning here since we're talking about Division 2 reality. Okay, so now that's interesting. So you're seeing something empirical in the Division 2 reality that doesn't exist. That's a model for, this isn't the point here, but I can just say this in passing, that would be held for everything in here according to Buddhist atomists. Now, when I say doesn't exist, it's not clear how strong that should be taken. Does that mean truly doesn't exist, or is just half real, or semi-real? That's a big debate that's been going on in India for a long time. Read Richard Dreyfuss's book, Recognizing Reality, for truly great discussion on that. So you see a line, but really the bullet is the same old bullet as it crosses the room. Now, imagine this. If you take it here, so here's where we get to showing how reality is paradox for Division 2, anything from physics up. If you have a camera, a super fast camera, that can take pictures of the bullet as it goes across the room, say the fastest camera there is, what's it going to film? It's going to film still states. Okay? Or at least what appear to be almost still states. You're not going to see any blurring in that bullet. So the camera, if it takes 100 pictures from here to the other side of the room, it's going to be bullet, 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 bullet. So if you're sitting here watching the bullet fire, and the camera here is, quote, watching, unquote, the bullet fire, you see two completely different realities. The camera sees a different reality than you. You see a line, it doesn't see a line. Okay? Now, what's most interesting about this is it appears that the best way to describe I'm using an approximate description just so we can get the point across quickly. The best way to describe what the bullet or the camera sees is a set of still states from one side of the bullet, from one side of the room to the other. Now, what does that mean? That means that motion is constructed out of stillness. Now, that should sound a lot like some of this stuff here. All these, maybe I didn't put it there, but I could have put motion comes from stillness. Would be another problem. So now if you had the fastest camera there is, it would take pictures that would be so close to being still that you could just call them, in the Division 2 perspective, as being still. Now the Division 1 perspective involves things like Heisenberg's uncertainty, so that's a different issue. But we're talking about Division 2 here, from here up. And so you can see that if you describe motion, just start to describe anything that moves. You're describing something that is not moving. So you're describing something that's moving, but is composed of states that are not moving. So if each state of something is not moving, it would seem to be a paradox to say that the unmoving states give rise to motion. What actually seems to be a better description is to say there's a state that's still, a state that's still, still. Your mind perceives them all at once because your mind's not fast enough to see all the stillness, and therefore constructs the idea of motion. So the concept of motion, one of the most basic principles we have of matter, can be described as being absurd because it's composed of unmotion.
Well, I mean, if you take Bergson's point about duration, what he's saying is that movement and time are subjective readings of a situation. That may depend on memory. But that doesn't contradict any of these other matters. It's simply talking...
No, that's in line with everything I've said. There's a lot of similarity between Bergson, Bergson and like his book Matter and Memory, with what's being said here. Now, not full alignment, but he is definitely more in line with this than he is not in line with this. That's for sure. I mean, a lot of the Western philosophers, Kant, Hume, have huge similarities to some of this, and it's a lot of some writers who I've cited have said it seems kind of ironic that at the time in Europe when Indian Buddhism came into the culture, after the book publishing was flourished through Europe, it's kind of ironic that all of a sudden medieval philosophy changed and you have philosophers like Kant showing up. His transcendental idealism is enormously Buddhistic. In fact, the author I quoted to you at the very beginning of this talk, Trubetsky, is called a neo-Kantian Buddhist. It means a new Kantian Buddhist. And of course, Hume's theory of causation, sounds exactly like what the Buddhists were saying. So the point is, though, it seems like this is very controversial to some, not me. Western philosophers may have ripped off Indian Buddhists, but that tradition has been forgotten by contemporary philosophers. Hang on, did you, I think I cut you off, something I'm good at doing. Your question have any more?
I was really pointing up there isn't any sort of contradiction. I mean, on the one hand, you're talking about subjective experience, and on the other hand, you're talking about some idealized position outside of the subjective view.
Oh, no. The positioning of the bullet is always consciousness. Okay, if I see your point, you're saying you're describing states of consciousness, but you're talking about the bullet being outside. Which one are we talking about here? That is actually, if that gets confusing, which it should, that's actually not my problem. The problem with that is that all of us have developed as humans to believe there's this reality outside of us. It's objective, hardly ever questioned. It's amazing how little it's questioned. And to say that, if I come along and say, oh, it's just construction of consciousness, if I say something like position, motion, momentum, whatever, I'm referring to states of consciousness. So in my example of the bullet I just gave, to most properly describe that, I would say, your conscious generation of an empirical reality of a bullet is an absurdity. That would be the best way to put it. Does that make sense? That went well.
It does until you're in the line of the bullet, and then reality falls into place.
Oh, well, sure.
Suddenly.
Well, what the Buddhists would say, what's the difference? It's just more empirical conscious generation.